then let's dive into lesson 4. What matters and what doesn't? I'm going to guess none of you have heard this song, but all you really need is love. And a license and a blood test and a bunch of invitations, a minister, a white dress, and of course a congregation. And flowers and music and candles and cake, and a bunch of rice for folks to throw as you drive away. All you really need is love, and bridesmaid and groomsmen, and a wedding coordinator. And food for the reception, you'll need someone to cater. Did I forget to mention, you'll take a couple rings, and of course a PA system if you're wanting me to sing. Good old Brad Paisley. Deep cut off of one of his albums. All you really need is, what makes a wedding a wedding?
Legally, all you really need is the license and an officiant.
Well, you're
And
missing
the bride and the groom.
a bride and a groom and,
Oh, they're parents.
it doesn't have to be parents,
Oh, it's
but you
just
do
two
need a
witnesses.
witness.
Two witnesses.
So, really all you need is someone who's designated to officiate, and you actually forgot one more thing. You need vows. You do have to speak the vow. Even before the justice of the peace, you still have to say, I do take this person to be my husband. I take this person to be my wife. But all that other stuff does not make a wedding a wedding. They're not what makes it the start of a marriage. What matters? I'm going to ask a different question. Does that mean those things aren't important? It's real hard for Sheila, who made wedding cakes for.
You have no idea how many brides I would tell, you know, but they'd come and they'd be really stressed. I'd say, if you just go down to the courthouse, you'll be just as married as if you do all of this. Nope, they didn't listen.
She said, I was trying to save you money.
I was.
I've told couples, do this right now.
Yeah.
We can do this next week. And one take me up on it. They weren't ready to move out. So they had two choices. Either Cassie wasn't going to do the wedding, or they could do it right now. Make the right choice. Do it right now. Stop playing pretend. So, what's really needed is not much, but does that mean that the rest of that stuff is unimportant?
Because family, it's a big deal for the family.
Okay, it's a big deal to the family. Does the white dress matter? Maybe less today.
Yeah.
But it should matter what it symbolizes. Do you want pretty flowers at your wedding? I think you probably do. Do you want those ugly bridesmaid dresses? Yeah, it makes the bride look even better.
I've been around a lot of weddings.
Actually, no. I mean, I haven't done one here.
No.
And I only did 3 in Two Rivers.
Mm-hmm.
And one was on location. At their house. That was one where I proudly read the room properly when I started with quoting 3 dog I had all of them listening. Yeah, I knew what crowd I was preaching to here. Hey, so, you can, it doesn't matter if it's in the church. None of that stuff matters. And yet, I would never tell a bride it's unimportant. Okay, I shouldn't say never. Sheila's right. Sometimes you might have to say, none of this makes the wedding. If it's raining on your wedding day, it's still going to be a marriage. Doesn't matter. But you get why it's important.
The girl will say it's at the altar. It's still.
Pastor should have told them at the reception, don't lock your legs.
Yeah.
So, when we consider the Lord's Supper, what matters, what counts, and what's important, I want us to be able to consider how those aren't always the same answers. So, what is needed to celebrate the Lord's Supper? I have 4/5 things listed there. So I think the wedding analogy might help you a little bit with 4 and 5. So what's number 1 needed? You need bread. You need wine. Or, to use Jesus' words, we might want to say the cup. But you're not wrong. We'll get to that in a minute.
Is that number 2 or is that part
That's
of number
2.
1? Okay.
What else is needed? The word is needed.
Somebody to say the word. Actually.
You need an officiant. Someone to administer the supper. And at a wedding, you need an officiant. Who else do you need? You need a bride and groom. You need people to receive the Lord's Supper. If no one's eating and drinking, it's not the Lord's Supper. It's just sitting there. So, let's define each of those. And you can turn to Matthew 26 through 29 for a little bit of help. Unless your pages stick together. So, while they were eating, Jesus took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to the disciples. He said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took the cup, gave thanks, and gave to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the New Testament, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you that I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now until the day when I drink it with you in my Father's kingdom." So, define bread.
Body.
That's what it is in the Lord's Supper. Think more simply. Flour and liquid.
Was this the Passover supper?
It was. So hold that thought. What is bread?
Staff of life.
Think simply.
My mind.
So she said flour and water, flour and liquid, but if I mix flour and liquid, what do I get? Okay, what turns it into bread?
Yeast.
You bake it. Now, the word bread here does not say unleavened bread. It simply says bread. And perhaps more importantly, in 1 Corinthians 10, Paul says, "This bread that we break, is it not a participation in the body of Christ our Lord?" And so he's talking to the Corinthians apart from the celebration of the Passover. I don't know that we can say for certain that they would have been using unleavened bread at the meals in 1 Corinthians that the Corinthians would have. However, we know that Jesus was using unleavened bread at the Passover. So we know he instituted it using unleavened bread. And so unless there's a reason why we wouldn't, we also generally do choose unleavened bread. But bread is bread. Does it matter what kind of flour?
Is that because of in the Passover, they were supposed to remove all yeast from the house?
Yes. What kind of flour do you think Jesus used? Probably not.
Barley.
Probably barley. Barley is cheaper to grow. But it's of a lesser quality in flavor and texture than you've ever baked with barley. This is a little bit less, got a different flavor to it. Maybe, so I can't say that for sure. But there's a good chance it was barley bread. And so we don't worry about what kind of flour you're using, what kind of process you use to make it into bread. All you care about is that you would look at, granted, we probably wouldn't look at our wafers and call it bread. But it is flour and water and it's baked. And it is as close to unleavened bread as we can probably get on a mass scale. The only difference is they probably would have cooked it on a hot surface as much as they would have cooked it in an oven. So it would have been very cracker, like a saltine cracker fits with what unleavened bread would probably look like. So
Would they have added salt to that? To their bread when they
I don't have an ancient Jewish recipe for it. But I'm guessing they would add salt because they understood that salt was necessary for things like that as well. It does more than just flavor, although that is even in bread its main goal is to add a little bit of complexity to it. All right, so define cup. Obviously, Jesus isn't saying just have a cup. It's the contents of the cup that matters. So what's he talking about?
Grape product?
Grape product. Why do you say grape product?
Well, it would have probably been fermented because you can't stop it from fermenting.
He says fruit of the vine. So that is talking about grape product. That's what I was getting at. He says fruit of the vine. Now, do you know when grape juice was invented? I don't know the exact year, but I think it's the 1920s.
Yeah, but they think wine's been being made for about 75 years.
Wine's been around pretty much as long as people have been around. Same with beer. There's debates on how those became, how people discovered. But wine, it wouldn't take much discovery, would it? You eat a grape that's been out in the sun a little bit too long, you're like, The birds and the squirrels sometimes get a little tipsy.
I guess they've only been known that for about the last 150 years that 150 years ago, before that, nobody knew about how grapes produce their own yeast and ferment.
I didn't know.
They've only been known for about 150 years now that grapes actually had their own little characteristic of being able to have their own yeast in there, being able to ferment.
And in general, everybody drank wine at most meals. They would water it down severely. But if your water isn't very pure, you're getting it out of the cistern and it tastes a little stale, adding a little sour wine, cheap wine to it, kicks that right up. I mean, I still do that. I put a little, bubble some stuff and put a little, I use pomegranate juice or something, put it in there, and it makes it taste so much better. Makes it much more drinkable. And so they were doing that all the time. It would also help kill some of the bacteria that was probably in there too. If you mix the wine with the water, and especially if it's strong wine, which they probably didn't have that many ways to stop it from keep getting stronger. So you mix the strong wine heavily with water, and you might add spices to it. And we also know in the Passover meal, that was part of the tradition that they would pass a cup of wine around. So fruit. Hello, Shauna.
Hello, how are you doing?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Doing good.
So we know that they were drinking wine. At the same time, if I want to be careful, Jesus says fruit of the vine. So liquid grape juice, or liquid product of grape, would fit what he's talking about. And if you want to be real persnickety, I think it takes like an hour for alcohol to start forming in grape juice, it'd be like 0.001%, but grape
Yep.
juice ferments.
It would just depend on how soon it's been pressed from the grape.
Well, I mean, they put it through the process. I don't know if you opened a bottle of Welch's, if you would, that I don't think it would, but pretty much as soon as it's exposed to the air, it's going to start to ferment. But, and I don't like playing, we'll get to this a little bit later, I don't like playing games. So, in general, wine, it's worth noting, I don't have a problem if someone asks for grape juice for whatever reason, but I've come to appreciate more, why not just add a drop or two to some water? Because that's even closer to what they would have done, because they would have mixed it with water. The amount of wine doesn't matter. It's not the alcohol that makes the Lord suffer. But let's just not play here, please. All right? The Word. What is the Word when it comes to the Lord's Supper?
It's what Jesus said.
Okay?
This is my body and this is
In the same way that I don't play around with what's in the cup, or I try not to play around with what type of bread we're using. I'm not going to probably take rice and smash it together and say, well, now this is bread because I smashed a bunch of rice together. But if I use rice flour baked in the bread, I also don't know if I would say, oh, that can't be. So I'm not going to make rules, but, is it enough to say, take, eat, this is my body, which is given for you? Is it enough to say, take, drink, this is my blood, which has been poured out for you? I suppose it could be, but why not just include all the words? And so usually we quote from, we mix all four, but especially 1 Corinthians and Matthew, and say, well, this is what Jesus spoke, and so we know that this is set aside. What about the officiant? What's that mean? So, who is distributing the Lord's Supper on the first night of the Passover? Jesus. Who is receiving the Lord's Supper, according to that? Disciples. So, once again, without being too rigid about these things, the one who stands in the place of Christ should be the one who distributes, and only disciples should be invited to the table.
Even the one that,
I'm of the
Betrayed.
opinion Judas is gone.
oh, okay.
I can't prove it. Because John doesn't include the Lord's Supper in his gospel. And some, going in the Wayback Machine, some argue that he didn't need to because he wrote John chapter 6, so he didn't need to include. So some people include that argument for John 6 being about the Lord's Supper. But John doesn't include the Lord's Supper, but he talks about Judas going away at the meal. I kind of get the impression that it's before the Lord's Supper, because it's immediately after the Lord's Supper that Jesus then instructs Peter that he's going to fall away, and they get up and go sing a hymn. And so in all the timing, it makes the most sense that Judas is already going to find his boot squad. Yes?
Isn't there somewhere where it says that the one who I give some bread,
Right, so
a piece of bread or something?
yes, that's in John 2, where he's the one that I give this piece of bread that I've dipped in the bowl is the one who will betray me.
Yeah.
And then he looks at Judas and says, what you are going to do, go and do quickly. And Judas gets up and leaves. But there's no indication that that's not just a normal part of the Passover meal, and that's part of the special part of the Lord's Supper. But if someone wanted to be angry with me and say, no, you can't prove that, that's my opinion by looking at the timeline and the words. The conclusion I draw, but I'm not going to insist. And one of the arguments I have for that is we're told that Satan entered Judas already before they were at this meal. So the way that the Lord's Supper is worded, I just find it difficult to include Judas in the meal. He is included in the foot washing. Jesus washes his feet, looks into his eyes. I don't think that's the Lord's Supper. So then, related, let's take it one step deeper then. So, good pause. So if you have those 5 elements, there you have the Lord's Supper. And you will always have the Lord's Supper. You have bread and a cup, and the words, and someone to give and someone to receive. There you will have Christ's body and blood given and poured out for you for the forgiveness of your sins. Then I ask the next question. I forgot my book. Who can officiate the Lord's Supper? Careful, this is a trick E question. Not really a trick question, but it is kind of a trick question. So, for help, look up 1 Corinthians 4, verses 1 and 2. And I have to go get my book of practice. Here you go. Who wants the book of conduct? I have your page marked. You don't even have to look it up. Who wants it? Joel, you want it? To read it for everybody, or are you going to make me read it?
Oh, no.
You get to be the prize pupil today, because you get the book of conduct. So first, let's hear 1 Corinthians 4. Anyone?
So then, men ought to regard us as servants of Christ and as those entrusted with the secret things of God. Now it is required that those who have been given the trust must prove faithful.
Okay? I'm going to read from the EHV because I think I like that translation a little bit better. The NIV is kind of a flat translation. This is the way a person should think of us, as servants of Christ and stewards of God's mysteries. In this connection, moreover, it is required that stewards that they be found faithful. All right, Joel, what's the Book of Concord, Article 14? You have to look past the introductory material to the actual words. I think it's on the next column.
Oh, right before 15.
Yes.
Our churches teach that no one should publicly teach in the church or administer the sacraments without a rightly ordered call.
Nice and short. Could all memorize that one. Don't know why you want to have it memorized, but it's so. Who can officiate the Lord's Supper? By the church and by the Lord, one who is appointed as a servant of Christ and his steward. What is a steward? Yeah, someone who manages the household on behalf of his master. Why? Not just for good order, although part of what the confessors are saying is they were being accused that they were destroying all order within the church, that anybody could preach, anybody could teach, anybody could administer the sacraments, that there was no order whatsoever. They're saying, no, 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 we still abide by the orders established by Christ, and we still maintain these things for the good of the people and by God's command. So they're refuting a false accusation against them. But why bother?
Keep the integrity.
Okay. Who is going to be held accountable for how the Lord's Supper is celebrated? The one who is administered. That falls on your pastor's shoulders to offer it or withhold it, and to make sure everything is done in a good order so that there is no doubt as to what is happening here. And God will hold your pastor to account for how he does these things. And so if God says he's going to hold these people to account, we want to make sure that these people are fitting with what the Lord requires of those who are his students. So then we can go to 1 Timothy and look at the list of what is required of an overseer, and you want that person who's going to stand in the place of Christ for the people to be able to fulfill this duty. That isn't to say, let me take it past that. Why did I say that's a trick question?
Exceptions to the rule. I was thinking in previous years, if our pastor was gone for several weeks, rather than withholding communion from people, he designated someone to administer.
Okay. Is that sacrament then invalid? Absolutely not. That's why I say it's a trick question, because the person standing at the altar does not change the sacrament at all. Did I say it backwards? Oh, I meant, is that sacrament invalid? Absolutely not. It is absolutely not invalid. The person standing at the altar does not change the power of the word and the use of the sacrament in the least. And that was actually, they wrestled with that in the early church. In times of persecution, sometimes people's pastors would fall away and give their offering to God Caesar, or burn their incense at the altar of the false gods, because they did not want to be persecuted. And then the faithful Christians would wonder, but he's the one who baptized me. He's the one who gave me the Lord's Supper. And so we said, the faith of the person giving it does not change what's being given. That comes from God. God will hold that person to account. But what's being given depends on God. So why does it matter who officiates? Okay? Okay? Well, that might have mattered.
Because we believe that God called you.
Because God's appointed the person to do that. I'll add this. Does a person ever need to receive the Lord's Supper to go to heaven? No. Is there ever an emergency Lord's Supper?
I've never heard of one.
No, there's not an emergency. There's emergency baptisms. Because there are times when we want that special assurance of God over this person. And so, yeah, we want our pastors to baptize. Baptism's also a mystery. But, in an emergency, get the person baptized.
Yeah, like I'm qualified enough to baptize somebody, but I'm not qualified.
But in general, even in baptism, we want that person to be welcomed into the church. And when we can, we want in good order the person called by the church to do that. But we recognize there are emergency situations where, let's just get this child baptized, or let's just get this person baptized. And you're not going to wait to find a minister of the gospel to do it. You're just going to do it. And that does not change the validity of that baptism, nor is it done out of bad order. It's all within good order. I don't know a situation where the Lord's Supper fits in that category.
If a baby is still alive in the womb, but there's a chance that it's going to be a stillbirth, they think the baby is going to die during birth, and that baby be baptized in the womb.
I do not see how. I just don't. You have to be able to apply water.
That's where I was thinking.
And in that case, and in all cases of stillborn or miscarriage, the believer trusts the mercy of God. Yeah, we know who our God is, we know what our God can do. And so we place that child at his feet. What are your questions about that?
So the pastor determines who can officiate, basically, is that,
Well, the pastor ultimately determines who may receive and who does not.
right. But then who can, in his place,
So,
offer it?
I'll say two things. How many of you are old enough to remember your pastor would never receive the Lord's Supper at his own church, unless there were two pastors? It was one of the reasons why pastor conferences had to be at least 4 times a year, because Luther said you can't be a Christian unless you receive the Lord's Supper 4 times a year, so your pastor better be able to go there. But why would he not receive the Lord's Supper?
At one time, they
Because-
felt that only
Okay,
the trained.
so are we going to say that for however many centuries there were, that those pastors didn't understand something that we better understand than them? I'm cautious. Now, I think it's completely different to say, no, I'm still officiating the Lord's Supper. I'm still administering the Lord's Supper here. And those who help me at the altar are simply distributing it. And I'm perfect, like, I don't really understand why that wasn't seen as acceptable, that as elders serving under the pastor, they're distributing. I don't know why we drew that line. At the same time, up until the 1970s, mid-1970s, when the vicar program was instituted at our seminary, a student would not have administered the Lord's Supper. And from my perspective, I have to go, well, what changed? And there's 2 sides to that. One, when a student goes to preach, we have asked him to serve as the preacher and liturgist to forgive sins on behalf of the church in this time and in this place. And so he is in good order serving at that time. But is he a steward of God's mysteries yet? I know a number of men who did not make it past their vicar year. Is that a responsibility that those men are ready to carry? I don't know. And so, my own personal practice, I go, I'm not sure. Now, we had a vacancy, and Pastor Janish was, now Pastor Janish, Vicar Janish was coming down here, or, I don't know, did Gordon Peters ever give you the Lord's Supper? Either way, I would not be like, oh, that was completely out of, I'm not trying to overthrow the way the Wells is doing things now. I read the confessions and I read 1 Corinthians 4 and I go, is this the wisest way to do this in regard to what the scriptures say. And so that's why when I'm gone, it's been my practice here not to have the Lord's Supper. I wait before this. I didn't come to this conclusion until like 2 years after I was already doing it, although I grew up with it. We always had pastors. There were pastors everywhere. Pastors coming out of the woodwork in Two Rivers to serve that congregation. So, does it matter? Yes and no. It doesn't affect the validity of the sacrament. It doesn't mean that your church is sinning against the Lord or sinning against the sacrament in any way. But is it the wisest way to proceed? I'm not. Go ahead.
Okay, this is kind of a personal view of something that I don't know what to think. So, my brother was a Missouri Synod pastor.
Okay.
Now he quit, and I've never asked, and he's never offered. And now he's a chaplain at a hospital
Okay.
in Wisconsin. So would he still be a pastor, or would he not be qualified to give out the Lord's Supper?
So I don't know how the hospitals are viewing their chaplains. In general, when we talk about ordination and, serving in that regard, I serve as a pastor based on my call from you, and I'm qualified to serve as a pastor in the umbrella of the Wisconsin Synod. That's why I don't need to re-register to be ordained when I move to Oregon. I don't have to fill out new paperwork to say, hey, new pastor, I've been ordained. It's all official. I can do all the official acts that a pastor would do. I don't know what happens if you resign your call, how it comes that the hospital would take you on as a chaplain, or if the hospital would even care. I don't know what training or ordination the chaplains at our hospitals here have. My bride speaks well of the chaplain at all of them. He's there when they need him in a very difficult time, and he's gifted in that respect. I don't know what his call and ordination looks like. I just don't know.
I had a writer for a number of years who was one of the chaplains at Good Sam, and you would not want him. His philosophy was just going to make them laugh, brighten their day. I don't
So he's
believe.
Pastor Pat Jackson.
Yeah, I don't think he had any training. I'm not even sure he had a church that he belonged to. In the conversations, a little lax.
Because I know in the military, some chaplains
All
they're trained in multiple religions.
But they're all endorsed by a church body. Your rabbi in the military is going to be formally recognized as a rabbi. Your Lutheran preacher, probably going to be the LCA, maybe he'll get lucky in these LCMS, but they're going to be formally recognized by that church body. Certainly, your Catholic chaplains are all going to be properly ordained, or else in the Catholic Church, you can't do the hocus pocus unless you're properly ordained. So they would say, literally, someone who's not ordained literally cannot do the sacraments. Because that authority trickles down from the Pope. I don't know how they deal with baptism.
Another anecdotal thing, a friend that I had she was in a Catholic church, and her, what do you call it, duty, her service was to go to shut-ins and give them the sacrament. So would that have been blessed by the priest?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
So, A, it would only be bread. It would only be the host. And B, it would be taken out of the tabernacle and then distributed. Because in transubstantiation, once it's changed, it always is. And so yes, that's absolutely how that's done. I don't even know, I've never been a party. I've maybe asked my dad, maybe he would know. Do they even say the Lord's? I think they just say, and now here is the Lord, take and eat this, the body. I think they just, I don't know what they do in that service. But they do not consecrate during that time because it's already been consecrated. That is a decent enough place to stop, unless there's, but you can either write down, or if you have another quick question about your weird pastor and his own weird opinions, and I say weird because they are slightly out of step with other Wisconsin Synod theologians, and he recognizes that. He's in line with ELS though, so I guess I have that going.